Today we're talking about this incredibly useful question, what brings you here? But I really want to encourage you to not take this question literally. This is a question where the literal meaning doesn't really make a lot of sense because when you bring something, you take it with you. So when somebody asks you what brings you here, they're really trying to find out your deeper motivation for doing something. And so it could bring you to wherever, whatever location that there is. And we'll talk about that in just a moment, but I just want to give you a little introduction. You're going to be asked this question in a variety of environments. In job interviews, someone asking about your interest in the organization or in the company or even in the position. You might be asked that if you've moved to a new location. Someone wants to know why you're living in this particular city, especially if they hear you have an accent, a regional accent, or an international accent, and they don't exactly hear what it is that you're they don't understand. What are you doing here? What's the point of you being here? Because you're from a different part of the country or part of the world. You'll also hear this question in networking situations, especially if you go to an event where there's a specific reason different people would go to this event and maybe it doesn't make sense why you're there, or maybe they just want to know more about you. And it's also just a really great question that you can use in order to initiate a conversation in just about any environment. So think about it. If you're in some environment that's not your home or your office, someone can ask you this question: what brings you here? They can ask you, like I said, at a networking event, at a cafe, at a bar, at an amusement park, at a concert, at any kind of interesting event in a park. If you're on vacation, someone might ask you that. What brings you here? And the reason this question, what brings you here, is so important and so useful, and this makes it one of the most common conversation questions in English, is that the question is what we call open-ended. And what I mean by the word open-ended, the expression open-ended, is that the person who is responding to this question has the choice to decide how they want to respond. They can give lots of details or a few details. They can be specific about something they want the person to know or not. So this open-ended question, just like the one we talked about in episode 2, tell me about yourself, is your invitation to respond in the way that's most appropriate for the situation, or to respond in the way that's most appropriate for the person that you're meeting, especially in small talk. Maybe you're not sure how you feel about the person, or you don't want to share, or maybe you're a spy and you don't want anybody to know your true story. You have the choice. Instead of someone interrogating you and asking you lots of questions, you can choose how you want to respond to it. And that's why it is such an amazing question. And then that's why this question is often one of the number one questions in small talk. We talked earlier on episode 1 about the question, what do you do? And people ask that, what do you do for a living? What do you do for work? What do you do for fun? Because people usually just start with that question because usually our professional identities are central to our lives. And so it's an easy question. And often what brings you here is a very easy question in small talk. But we're going to talk about it both professionally and personally. So don't worry, we'll get started with that as well. And so this is just something that you can really use both to answer the question more effectively and also to ask the question in order to get other people talking rather than you having to come up with the great answer. So it's useful for both situations. It's similar to tell me about yourself because it's open-ended. It gives the person a chance to decide how they want to respond or for you to decide how you want to respond. So we'll talk a little bit more about deciding the best way to respond. So let's get started talking about this particular question. And the reason I started with the introduction is I really wanted you to understand that this question might seem confusing if you translate literally, but it's actually a really, really easy to understand question once you know what the person means by it. And the thing I also want you to understand is that as you might be non-native English speakers, English learners, you're trying to improve your English, but also native speakers have to practice their response to this question. Not every native English speaker, because English is their first language, is a good conversationalist, or they even know how to respond. When I was preparing for this lesson, I did a quick Google search to see what kind of information was out there, and a lot of people debate on message boards about what's the best way to respond to this question. Because your choice of your response response can really guide the rest of the conversation. So it might make you feel a little pressure that you have to answer perfectly, but just remember this is just a question a question and an answer that's guiding you towards the rest of the conversation. So as we go through a couple of different examples and we talk about situations where you may want to ask or answer this question, I want you to keep that in mind, that this question, the response is not permanent. This is the opening to a conversation, and it really gives you the chance to focus on the things that you're most concerned with at the moment for that other person to know. And so that's especially important when we talk about job interviews. So and so if somebody asks you what brings you here, they're asking you what made you or encouraged you to come to this location, right? So it could be a specific location, like I mentioned, a cafe, a bar, a concert, or some sort of networking event or some sort of social event. And it can also be asking you what interests you about the place or the food or the music. If you're, at this opening event for a new restaurant, maybe what brings you here is like, oh, I really love new restaurants, or I'm friends with the owner and I wanted to support him, or something like that. So what brings you here is something that you can use in order to guide the conversation with the other person, and it will vary. There's no one answer you're going to learn today that's going to be perfect in every situation. So I hope that makes sense. And you guys can let me know in the chat or in the comments later on if this is helping you understand the question. So the other thing to keep in mind is that what brings you here is both a common interview question and it's also a common casual conversation question. Your answers are really going to vary based on your goal for this conversation, based on the setting, based on the person you're talking to, based on your particular goals in your life right then at that moment. So keep in mind that this is kind of the whole goal of all of the conversations with Kim questions, is that there's not one perfect answer and then you're all set for the rest of your life. You studied it, you're done. I don't have to think about English anymore. No, the whole point of these conversations for more advanced English speakers is that you have to continue to develop your answer and really consider what it is you want the other person to know. So I hope that that's not discouraging to you and it's more encouraging to you as well. I'm just checking to make sure you guys are here and watching, because I always have to check on the technology to make sure it's working. Okay. All right. So the other thing I want you to, so as we're going to talk about good answers, I have a challenge for you. And so I want to start with this first. So I want to ask you, what brings you here to the English with Kim YouTube channel? What brings you to these live lessons on Conversations with Kim? So remember, this question is intended to spark a more in-depth conversation. And as always, after we go through the main part of the lesson, we're going to have a chance to talk and practice answers about these particular questions. So I would love for you guys, as we're talking about it, to think about your answer. And when you're thinking about your answer to this question, what brings you here to the English with Kim YouTube channel? What brings you here to these live lessons? Consider your response, right? Consider what it is you want me to know about you, what you want the other people participating in this lesson to know about you, and that's going to help guide the rest of the conversation that we're going to have in this live lesson. So I need you guys to be thinking about it and participating. And of course, if you watch the recording, you can participate later, but your responses help guide this entire conversation. Otherwise, it'd be just conversations with myself, right? Okay, so just think about it as we go through this response. So let's start with talking about what brings you here in a job interview situation. So in the last episode, and when talking about Tell Me About Yourself, I mentioned that when I was interviewing candidates to replace me in my job in Chile, I generally started the interview with the question, okay, thanks, so nice to meet you. Tell me about yourself. What brings you to this organization? What brings you to this interview? What interests you in this particular position? I usually asked a few questions at the same time because as a person who likes conversations, I want to make it easier, not harder for the other person. Those of you who have had a challenging job interview know how that feels. Sometimes the reason job interviews are challenging is that the person who's asking you the question isn't good at asking questions. So keep that in mind. It's not always you. Sometimes it is definitely the other person. So when someone says, what brings you here to this, and when they mean what brings you here, it means usually to this organization, to this job interview, to this position. It's an invitation, and you have to keep that in mind. Just like tell me about yourself, which is why I use the two together. It's your invitation to talk about how your experience connects to the current job, the position you're applying for, and the organization. You might also be asked this question in a situation where you're looking for, when you're working with new clients. So when I meet with new clients, people who want to work with me one-on-one for coaching, I usually ask them that as well. So what brings you here? What's your goal? So basically the person, when they say what brings you here, they're giving you the opportunity to share all of those things that you have in mind about the position. So it's an invitation for you to start. So if you think about a conversation as kind of a game of ping pong, boom, 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 they're giving you the chance to go first. It's like flipping the coins in sports games and somebody else gets to start. So you have the advantage because your answer is going to guide the rest of the conversation. Of course, in a job interview, if you miss talking about something that they're interested in talking about, you can cycle back to that later. People will return to the things they didn't mention or change the subject to talk about things they don't want to. But your first impression is guided by your response to this type of question. So if someone says, tell me about yourself, you want to keep in mind your particular goal for this position. And so I mentioned in episode 2 that sometimes when you apply for a job, you may have experience that's not necessarily related to the position. So, for example, I've mentioned in previous videos that I once upon a time worked in immigration in Manhattan, in New York City. And I often mention that in order to show the fact that I have business experience, that I worked in a very fast-paced, busy environment, even though my positions since then have been more related to nonprofits or related to service, related to international education, and also to teaching English. So I often bring that in order to tie the story together. So what brings you here, in that same vein, what brings you here gives you a chance to answer the question for the other person, right? So you can kind of say, okay, I'm applying for this position because I've always been interested in this particular field of work, and my studies and my previous jobs have led me to really want a new challenge. And so you're basically connecting your studies, your work to this particular position and how you can help this organization. So that's something important to keep in mind. When someone asks you what brings you here, the focus is on the word here. They want you and they want here together. So if they're not sure why you're applying for this position or why this company is interesting to you, then they might not be interested in giving you the job. In American job interviews, your goal is to be incredibly clear about who you are, what your interest is in this organization. Because basically, this is a little side note, a little extra bonus information, is that if someone invites you for a job interview in an American company, they've already looked at your resume, so they're already 75% certain that you have the experience they're looking for. Now they just want to know how they feel about you. They want to connect the dots, right? They want to understand the flow of your job, the flow of your education. And they also want to understand a little bit more about why you're interested in this position. Because something that happens in other times of your life is that you're applying for any job. You'll take any job possible. But when you're going into an organization, a company, a nonprofit, whatever, any sort of institution where you can do a job, they want to know why you want to be in that particular company in that particular position. So when someone asks you what brings you here, they want to know what's specific about that. If you go to a job interview, you want to show the person who's asking you the question why you're interested in them. And you may be thinking, as I explain this, come on, Kim, like they don't really, like obviously I want this job, I want to work here. Like, why do I have to prove it? Really? Come on. I don't believe you. But this is how it works, because a lot of times you have to show that you've researched the company, that you understand the mission of the company, the values of the company or the organization. Especially in a job where you may be working in a very specialized field, they want to know that your interest has been continuing that you really want to work in that particular field. So I want you to keep that in mind as well, that people who are asking you this question, they're giving you the chance to show your interest in them. Remember, yes, if you have the perfect experience, but you have no special interest in that particular organization or line of work or fields or type of clients that they serve, you're less likely to get the job because they really want to hear that you care about their particular work. And so, like I said a little bit earlier, I ask my potential clients this question as well, because it's an invitation for them to tell you what their needs are. And so think about this in a professional situation where you may be working with clients, you may have customers, and like maybe even if you're a hairstylist or something like that, they sit down and they're like, well, what brings you here today? Why are you here, right? It's what brings you here is a nicer way of saying, why are you here? And it gives you the chance to really answer the question and tell them what you want. So when you're in a client situation and you're looking to hire someone, you kind of have the power because you're able to tell the person what you want, and then they can help solve the problem for you or decide if it's a good fit, if it's a good working relationship going forward. So that's why people ask, what brings you here? You may also hear somebody ask you, like I mentioned at the beginning, what brings you here if they are in a if they notice you're not from this country. So when I was living in Chile or in Peru, people would always ask, why are you here, basically, right? And so they're asking, what brings you here? In English, they would ask, what brings you here? What brings you to Boston? What brings you to New York? What brings you to California? What brings you to the US? They're going to ask this question in order to learn more about your motivation. So in a professional situation, they may ask, what brings you here? Because they really want to understand whether or not your goal is to stay long-term in this company, in this organization, or in this country. If you're just here because you want a one-year position, that might be fine for the job that they're trying to hire for. But sometimes they want someone who will grow with the company over 5 or 10 years. So your answer, what brings you here, needs to focus on that particular goal for this conversation, for this interview. So I want you to keep that in mind as well. And that brings me back to my point a little bit earlier about how you have to remember your goal for this interview or this goal for the conversation. So when someone asks you what brings you here, you're going to guide your response based on what you need them to know most. So like I mentioned in episode 2, if you don't necessarily have a lot of experience or you want to connect the dots, or maybe your experience, kind of like mine with creating this online business, if I were applying for a job that wasn't related to English, but it was related to marketing online businesses, I would have to talk about my experience with this rather than my experience teaching, because my experience teaching may not be relevant to the job. So you have to keep in mind, if you're having an interview, what do they most need to know about you and what do you most want them to know about you? That's going to really help you answer the question more effectively. So keep in mind your goal. What is it that you want the person to know? And that goes back to my challenge to you guys. Your goal or your intention for the conversation is going to really help you understand or not understand, but lead the conversation in the direction that you want. So in a job interview, you want them to know more about you and your interest in the position. But it's okay to ask questions in American job interviews. So you can even say, my goal is to find this type of job and I want to see if this position's a good fit. Then you're still in control because you're warning the other person or advising them that you're going to ask questions. So I hope that clarifies, and we can talk later in the live chat about whether or not it was clear about job interviews. But your answer, the other thing to keep in mind is the same with tell me about yourself. It needs to be more concise. You're not going to talk for, 10 minutes about what brings you here without giving the person more information and more details, right? You're going to give them the chance to keep asking you a question. So instead, you're just going to keep kind of a brief answer based on your intention, and then the conversation can flow from there. So don't think you need this super long answer, even though I'm explaining it in a lot of different ways. I just want to make sure you understand all the possibilities. You don't have to answer it for a super long time. So if I was applying for a job, I don't know, teaching online or something like that, what brings you here? I really love working with students online. I love the flexibility, and I'm really interested in this position because I think you're really motivated to help English learners. Maybe something like that. That's a short answer in order to show to some organization that I'm interested. But usually I connect it to my previous experience, something I'm doing right now, and then the direction I want to go in the future. So think of hitting a point of past, present, and future. That's in a job interview, kind of connecting the three things together, and also be sure to mention that particular company. Like I mentioned a little bit earlier, if you are living in a country that's not yours and you do have the desire to stay there, it's a really good idea to mention that you have a long-term goal of staying in this company. So definitely focus. Americans tend to focus more on the future than the present. It's one of the bad things about not bad things, but one of the particular things about our culture. So think about how you can show the person you want to grow. You want to continue to advance your career. You want to learn more skills. You want to work with a company in order to really help them achieve these goals that the company has, right? That you've researched and you understand the company has. So that's the answer for a job interview question. So we talked about what brings you here is a good conversation starter or good interview starter, right? It's a question that's asked in interviews. So let's talk about it now in more personal situations or networking situations. So their answer can either guide or end the conversation. So if somebody asks you what brings you here and you're at a networking event, maybe it's women in business, so if somebody asks you what brings you here, what brings you to this event, and your response could be something like, I'm here because I really want to learn how to empower women in order to take charge of their earning opportunities and really start becoming leaders in this particular field. I work in engineering and there aren't a lot of women in engineering. There's a good answer because you're giving the other person information to work with. If you're at a bar and it's a Wednesday night, let's say, and someone's like, hey, what brings you here? And you're like, oh, I'm waiting for a friend. We're going to have dinner, but I love this bar because I love the decoration. I love the interior. And then the person you can start talking about, hey, this is my favorite bar, and the conversation can go from there. If you're in a cafe and you're studying and someone wants to make small talk with you, I'm drinking iced tea, by the way. They might ask you something like, oh, okay, what brings you here today? And you say, oh, I work for myself and I just wanted to get out of the house. Oh, what do you do? And they can start asking you more questions. So people, if they want to talk to you, they might say, what brings you here? Let's think about you're at a concert, you're at this concert for one of your favorite bands. I can't think of one right now, but and someone says, hey, what brings you to this concert? And you say, I've been following this band since I was 15 years old, and I'm so excited to continue to see them live. I can't believe they're still performing. And they can say, I've been a fan since I was 17. And then the conversation can continue. You're volunteering information that can get the other person talking, that can get the other person continuing to share information with you. What are some other situations? An amusement park, you're waiting in line if an amusement park is where you have, the Ferris wheel and oh my gosh, the word, see, I forget words too. Roller coaster. You're waiting in line for the tall roller coaster. And so somebody's like, you're bored. You're just sitting in the sun waiting. And so you say, hey, what brings you here? And you're like, oh, I came with my friends from college. We just finished. We just graduated and we're celebrating. And they say, oh yeah, what about you? What brings you here? And you're like, oh, I'm visiting. My cousins are visiting with their kids and we wanted to take them somewhere fun. Already the conversation can get more interesting. So that's the kind of thing you want to open people to saying. It's a really great way to start responding to the other person, or to start interacting with someone you don't know. When you see someone and you don't know them and you want to start a conversation, hey, what brings you here? It's more interesting than what do you do, because that's such pressure. In episode 1, we talked about what do you do for fun? It's pressure, like impress me. That's why I don't like that. It really would depend on your situation, how to be witty. But I think what I would say, instead of giving you a specific witty, funny response, is I would probably make a joke about myself. Like, for example, if you're at a concert and someone asks you what brings you here, and they're going to notice that I'm not a native speaker, and they're going to ask me where I'm from, you can say, well, I just thought going to a concert would be a good way to practice my English. The other person's going to laugh, and then you're going to be able to talk about, so what are you doing here? They might want to ask more questions, what brings you to the concert. So that's what I would do, is I would make a joke that's, we say, self-deprecating, when you kind of make fun of yourself in a friendly way, kind of joking about that. So somebody asks at a concert, and you're at a concert, they're like, hey, what brings you here? Do you like the band? You say, no, it's just really hot out and I don't have air conditioning at my house. You can make a joke, and that response can get the person talking about the weather, which is a very common small talk topic. But it depends on your goal for this interaction. If you're approaching someone, sometimes you're just bored. You're waiting in line and you want to talk to someone. So you're waiting in line to get into the concert, right before the doors open. And you ask the person, hey, what brings you here? And you say, oh, I just really like waiting in line. They might laugh, and then you could say, no, really, what brings you here? And you could say, oh, I really love this band. I've been looking forward to it. I just found out, or I just saw them on Jimmy Fallon and I decided to go to the concert because it was happening locally, or I like supporting independent artists or something like that. So you have to think about a situation where you would want to say what brings you here. But I think that gives you some answers and responses. Yes. Oh, I'm glad that my pronunciation's clear. And yes, it's joking about yourself. So I would normally joke about that. People who are more I'm silly. I wouldn't say I'm super funny. I'm pretty silly in these conversations. So I would probably make fun of myself first, not in a mean way, in a loving way. And, but people who are funny would make a joke. Like if you're waiting in line, they would be like, yeah, it's just, I like waiting for things. It makes me learn patience. They might say it a little sarcastically to get the other person to laugh. But instead of I think you can make a lighthearted comment like that, but I really would still, even if I'm making a joke, think about how my joke will encourage the other person to keep talking. Because sometimes we can misfire with the joke and the conversation dies. The conversation ends. So that's something to just keep in mind as well, that you don't necessarily want to make a joke that will end the conversation. You want to keep it going. But I guess I'll leave this particular portion of this video lesson just talking about how your goal with all of these questions is to encourage more conversation, is to keep the conversation going. So I really want you to focus on how you can use this as kind of the starting off point, the jumping off point, the part where you're really going to keep the conversation or the interview going. So if you ask it, be prepared with a follow-up question. And of course, we'll talk about that at another time. I also have that free small talk guide on my website at englishwithkim.com/smalltalkguide, all one word. I'll include the link below the video and in a card on the YouTube video so that you can download it, and also on the end screen once I go back and edit this video later, add it to the video later. So you can download that to be prepared with other questions. And we'll be talking about other questions through this series. Questions that are not just these conversation starters like we've been talking about. But be prepared if the person doesn't respond in the way that's interesting to you to guide the conversation and to ask further questions. Don't just ask what brings you here and think that your conversation is done, that you've done all that you can possibly do for the conversation. Consider how you can do it a little bit more. And if you think after this video you want to, leave a comment and tell me what brings you to the YouTube channel or what brings you to your university, to your particular position, and practice with me or talk about the responses, you can leave a comment with that as well. So if there aren't any other further questions, I'm going to say goodbye to you guys. Don't forget that you can also ask questions at englishwithkim.ask. I'll have lots of links after this video. And thank you for joining me for episode 3 of Conversations with Kim. It was really fun getting to talk about this question, what brings you here, as a job interview question, and also as a question that you can ask people in order to start a small talk and initiate a conversation with strangers you don't know. I hope you feel more confident connecting your answer to that question to your goals and intentions for this interaction, whether it's an interview or a conversation. You feel like you can ask this question to people and also respond in a way that can be funny, self-deprecating, and also keep the conversation going. Remember, the goal of all of these conversations is to connect with the other person and continue the conversation. So it's one question at a time in order to really build your skills so that you feel more confident having these conversations in English. Once again, I'm Kim from englishwithkim.com. I'm your guide to the essential conversation skills you need to sound more natural in English. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and share it with a friend. And I look forward to sharing more tips with you soon. I'll see you again in the next episode of Conversations with Kim. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you, and I'll see you again soon. Goodbye.